Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Braich, and this is the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I am an emotional health and leadership coach and co-founder of the not-for-profit Seen and Heard, which supports those seeking healing, connection, and systemic change. My vision is to move myself and the world around me towards connection and compassion. And each week, I will connect with amazing guests who are on their journey to bring about meaningful change in their own lives and the world around them. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. Welcome everybody to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I'm delighted today to be joined by Susie Davies, who is the CEO of Papaya, Parents Against Phone Addiction in Young Adolescents. Papaya is a Bristol-based organisation founded in 2018 by Dr. Susie Davies. Susie is a GP based in the UK. Papaya believes every child has the right to understand the negative impact that excessive technology use can have on their physical and mental health. Through evidence-based talks and interactive workshops, Papaya empowers parents, carers and young people to make informed choices about smartphones, social media and screen use. Papaya delivers in-person sessions across the south of England and the Midlands, alongside nationwide online talks. In response to growing demand, Papaya has recently partnered with Smartphone Free Childhood and is expanding its UK-wide network of expert speakers. Between September 2024 and September 2025, Papaya reached over 16,200 children and more than 7,000 parents and carers. Susie has also written a book, a fantastic book called The Healthy Selfie. Welcome, Dr. Susie Davies.
Thank you for having me today.
It's lovely. It's a real joy to connect with you. And we were chatting just before we started recording that our worlds have connected because of my involvement with Smartphone Free Childhood, hearing about the amazing work that you're doing with Papaya, and I knew that we just had to have this conversation. So thanks for making time.
It's fantastic to be with you today and to join you.
Yeah, but it really is the sort of topic of the now. I think the press media stuff has massively ramped up recently, and with a social media ban for under 16s in Australia making global news, it's sort of every parent's challenge at the moment. It's every educator's challenge. It's just a societal challenge, isn't it? It's really blown up.
I mean, it's huge. I don't think any of us could have imagined being in this situation even 10, 15 years ago, that 97% of 12-year-olds would have a smartphone, and that actually that smartphone would make such a difference to their childhood and their well-being. I think at first, children were just given smartphones and life seemed to go on as usual. But I think, 10 years later, we're beginning to see the astronomical impact on young people. And yes, it is getting the attention of, the news around the world, politicians around the world, people in leadership, because I think we cannot sleepwalk into this situation any longer. We really need to do something differently.
Yeah, really important call to action there, and we're going to really get into the kind of what's going on at the moment, what needs to happen, and the work that you and Papaya are doing a bit later on. But I always like to start the podcast by kind of knowing a little bit more about the person I'm talking to. So, and we begin at the beginning. So, I'd love to hear a little bit about how things were for you when you were young, but what shaped you growing up.
That's such an interesting question, because I think, our experiences in childhood certainly shape us as adults. And when I look back at my childhood, I don't think it's a coincidence that I've ended up so interested in mental health. So although I grew up in a very loving home in Somerset, I'm one of 4 children. My parents were very busy. My dad worked as the local vicar, actually. And the 2 things that really shaped me were, one, kind of standing out in my local community as the vicar's daughter in quite a tough local school. So I got really bullied as a child. And that was, if I'm honest, really, really tough. I had a really difficult time at school, and my dad would come in and do assemblies, and I would be afterwards really picked on. And I think, again, when we're thinking about not wanting our children to be different or to not fit in, I really experienced that as a child, being the person who didn't fit in growing up. And then I also had a sibling with quite severe mental health problems, and that really impacted family life. I remember my parents really worrying about her and the impact that had on us. And really, quite a lot of the time, I had to sort of look after myself
Mm,
and two of my younger siblings. So again, I took on quite a carer role, I think, as a child. And I also think I found myself through working quite hard. So obviously, I went on to go to medical school, and I think being left a little bit on my own and having to find my own feet meant that I developed real resilience. I think I had to develop coping strategies and that inner kind of motivation to do well. I mean, my parents were incredibly supportive, but I think they had more on their plate than they could quite cope with some of the time. So lots and lots of love, lots of fun, but lots of challenges. And I
mm,
think it made me really tenacious, a self starter, and really resilient, but with a deep kind of awareness of the impact that mental health can have on well-being. I think a real compassion for people struggling with mental health problems and a desire to do something about it. So I don't think it's a coincidence I ended up as a
mm,
doctor, and I don't think it's a coincidence I've ended up specialising in young people's mental health and founded the charity Papaya.
mm. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I often say where our greatest wound lays is where we find our gold. And it's that's our gift for the world, is kind of in those early years experiences that really shape us. So I'm very sad to hear about the bullying, and it's something that comes up a lot on our podcasts because of, we do a lot on education, we do a lot on boarding schools, independent schools, and bullying seems to be often well the, the definitive kind of adverse childhood experience for so many people. Can you speak a little bit about perhaps your experience, or what you've seen as a professional now as well?
Well, as a child, I just remember feeling really alone and really vulnerable. I think there's just nothing worse than feeling, yeah, like the odd one out, having coming under some really negative comments and not feeling like you had a safe space to go to within the school environment. But I think the difference again then when I was at school is I could come home and I could shut the front door and actually there was a loving home to come back to. And I
Mm,
do think that's something that young people today don't necessarily have because their phones are in their back pocket and the bullies come home with them. So I can't imagine how
mm,
much worse it would have been if I was growing up today with online bullying as well. But I think, yeah, I'm seeing the problems every day as a GP of young people struggling with their mental health. And often it is linked to online bullying, that feeling of exclusion, horrible comments, both in person, but then being magnified 1,000-fold on social media. And
mm,
whilst when I was bullied, I felt alone and vulnerable, I think young people now actually feel incredibly publicly humiliated. So not only are they alone, but that bullying is in a really public sphere. So my bullying made me feel ashamed and like I didn't fit in. But I cannot imagine if I thought, oh my goodness, if 1,000 people had heard those negative comments, it would have felt so much worse. So I think
mm,
the negative impact of bullying and the effect on mental health is far greater now than it ever was when I was
mm.
growing up in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I can really connect with that feeling of aloneness, not having anyone to go to. I think it was the same when I was bullied at school. And as you say that you mentioned that you had a loving family to come home to, close the door, and I think whether it's smartphones now intruding into that quiet, private space, and as a species, we are supposed to be in stress, hunting, gathering, and being out there in the world, and then we're supposed to come back to the cave and kind of roll the stone across, and the nervous system settles, and stress plus rest equals growth. But now, if the stress is at home as well, it could be a difficult home life, it could be the smartphones, bullying, etc. Stress plus stress equals burnout. So it's really there. And I think my experience as boarding school, we didn't go home. We stayed in a high stress, high intensity um, uh, environment 24/7, often through the weekends as well. etc. And so the nervous system doesn't get to rest. The bullies never leave. Um, yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and also about your sister and her mental health challenges and the impact on the family. So really hear you when you say you took a caring role, and that sort of shaped doctoring, looking after people, studying, etc. Yeah. So as you sort of travelled out, then went to medical school, etc. How did you find that? Because we're often interested in how those early years shape the sort of adolescence and university bit when you're out on your own for the first time.
Well, I think my defining moment was choosing actually to take a gap year, and I went to live in Uganda for 8 months with one other girl who I'd never met before, and we lived in a little straw house, proper traditional sort of house in a village miles from anywhere. And I think I sort of say that's when my restorative season started, because
Mm.
I just felt very, very loved and accepted in this amazing community of people. I'm still in touch with people I met there now, and we had to sort of look after ourselves. And actually, I went from, having negative comments and feeling unaccepted, to being really cared for and welcomed into this community. So actually, when I went on to university to study medicine, I'd had this really restorative period in Uganda, and actually loved medical school, found lots of like-minded people, loved the challenge of study, loved the environment. So actually, although adolescence had been quite tricky, I think things really kind of changed in my early adult life. And I always say to young people, the toughest time, particularly as being a teenage girl, it's just really, really tough. And I remember just finding being a teenage girl really tricky, but actually once almost instantly got out of my teens, things got a lot easier and a lot better.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for sharing that. As a father of two 14-year-old girls, I can really connect with. It's so tough for them. It's so challenging for them going through that. And then as a parent, it's also very tough to watch and
Yeah.
not get involved and sort of provide loving support, but without trying to fix, without trying to get involved in it. It's very tough. So, but lovely to hear that you found your tribe, if you like. You found your connection away on that gap year, and then again at medical school. I think I had a podcast the other day with Dr. Warren Larkin, who's a really wonderful trauma-informed practitioner, and the conversation with him was around sort of we started talking about adverse school experiences rather than ACEs. It was ASES, and that there can be a benevolent protective factor, which is if a child experiences stress and challenge, but they've got a really good support structure at home and at school, the wound becomes gold quite quickly, and they carry that, what I would call sort of, because resilience is a bit hijacked as a word, especially in our area. Resilience can often mean dissociation. So, independence and resilience is sort of the hallmark of a boarding school education, but really that it's dissociation and detachment. And we want interdependence, and we want connectivity ideally. But he was saying that when those protective factors are there, then actually the young person goes off into the world really, really well equipped. So it sounds like you really took a lot of great things out of the experiences and into medical school as well.
Yes, I mean, you never would choose, would you, some of the difficult things you go through, but you also don't know how it shapes you, and then how you can use those experiences to help other people and to have a greater understanding of the
Mm.
difficulties people go through. Because I think that ability to connect with people is, again, so foundational for good mental health and for good relationships, which are so important, aren't they? So I do think having had difficult experiences and being able to understand how that feels can be a real benefit in forming future relationships and being inclusive, or how being vulnerable with other people, but in a really positive way. And I do think we can take some of these experiences and turn them into really important skills that can keep us happy and healthy in future life. but it doesn't mean they're easy at the time, or that, if you could say, would you choose A or B? I'd probably say, oh no, I wouldn't have chosen those bits of my childhood, but I can't change them. And I now hope that I can use them in a positive and beneficial way.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I really hear that. It sounds like you are, and we know you are from your work. So, there's I spoke to the comedian Mark O'Sullivan yesterday, whose podcast is called Making Lemons, for the reason life gives you them. There's not a lot you can do about it, but what are you going to do with those experiences, those lemons? So it's quite a lovely thought, isn't it? But so yeah, coming back to actually, there was something that I touched on. You really said in a few really good sentences the basis of what I would call emotional intelligence. You talked about being able to empathize with others, being able to communicate, put yourself in someone else's shoes, etc. Just education, schools in general. You work with an awful lot of them, and you've had your own children who are now late teens and growing up, etc. What's your take on education at the moment? What's your take on things like kind of IQ versus EQ, or exam culture versus emotional intelligence? What's your take on that?
I mean, I think we can see that the education system just doesn't have the flexibility to look at what each individual child needs. It's kind of cookie cutter system, isn't it? That one size fits all. And I do think actually what children need is to be understood, that everyone learns differently, that everyone has different needs. And in an ideal world, we'd be looking at a much more exactly individualized system that can look at a child, look at their interests, look at where their strengths and weaknesses are, and offer something that fits them. I think the problem is that so many children cannot cope with the level of exams, with the pressure, with the speed of learning, with the need to attain, right from, reception. Children are now being judged and marked, and they fail or they don't fail, they meet targets or they're not meeting targets. And actually, it's just really unhelpful. I'm actually dyslexic. I didn't do very well at school right up until the age of 13. I remember being put in sort of the extra lessons for reading and writing, aged 7 or 8 in my local school. And then suddenly at 13 or 14, I discovered how my brain worked, and that if I that I just needed to work a bit harder than everyone else, but actually I could do well. But I could have been written off, I could have given up, but I sort of, again, I think I just developed some skills that really helped me, but not till that little bit later. And again, if I'd been on all the targets in today's education system, I would have been written off. But actually, I did find myself that little bit later, not till sort of senior school, and actually, obviously, went on to do well and go to medical school. But I think I discovered those skills for myself. There wasn't any dyslexia support in those days. I do think children need to feel like they can succeed. I think there's nothing worse than feeling like you're failing or you're not meeting expectations that are being set. Education is not linear. We all have peaks, troughs, and I would love to see a system that can really take the individual and work at their pace, and really building on emotional resilience and those softer skills, and how to learn because you want to learn. That's the key. And again, when we're looking at ed tech, I worry that education sort of just being externalized again to sort of dopamine rewards and ticking boxes and learning answers, rather than learning because you love learning or you've got an interest in a subject. So I would love to see, a real sort of step back and a huge look at what education looks like and how it can benefit the child rather than just benefit the system.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing those words. I mean, I agree completely. And, whether it's you're a parent or whether you've got nieces and nephews or you're just kind of in contact with young people, I mean, my girls don't really go more than a week and a half without a test of some kind. And it's been that way, I think certainly since year 4, something like year 3 or 4. Most young people I speak to and connect with, largely primary school is okay. It has too much testing. But it's relatively benign. There's enough playtime going on. There's more of those nice connective things. There's still some sort of fun going on.
Yeah.
That jump to secondary school, often from a smaller school to the massive Shark Tank, you might be going from 400 school to 1,500 or something like that. That shock to the system, plus the hormones, plus the smartphones, it just feels to me like someone said to me, it's just something you have to survive. And I thought, oh my God, really? Do we have to sort of, in a Spartan way, break our children at some point in order to create more efficient taxpayers or something? I don't, why this cookie cutter system?
Well, I think it is probably down to money, isn't it, and resources. But I think particularly that jump to secondary school is incredibly, incredibly difficult for many young people. I'm a GP in inner city Bristol. My practice serves some really large kind of inner city schools, and many of the children there just are not thriving. They find it really, really challenging. Behaviour is often tricky in classrooms, but that behaviour is often tricky because those young people are not having their needs met. There's often a lot of bullying and unkindness, and again, what's the root of that? What's going on in that young person's life, or why do they need to act out in that way? And yet the resources are not there to look at the sort of the problems and to think, what are these children's needs? What do they need? They need to feel safe to learn. They need to feel like they belong. They need to feel like they're invested in and valued. And I think sometimes that does happen, and you can get fantastic teachers and fantastic schools, with a really good ethos. But I think for many children, exactly, they just feel like they are part of the system, and that system isn't supporting them in particular.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's spot on. Really, is so important to mention. There are so many brilliant teachers. My other half's a teacher, and there are a lot in my world, and they're doing a great job in a system that doesn't work. And fundamentally, institutions themselves, power structures, institutions, they struggle to work a lot of the time. They're sort of built on very old wiring. But thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. So just as we do, swinging back to your journey and post med school and things like that, kind of what started to then shape you towards the work that you're now doing. Tell us a little bit about your medical sort of side of things, and also that period of life where maybe starting a family, and because I know that your own relationship with your children and technology was such a big driver of your work.
Yes, so my eldest daughter is now 17, and I qualified as a GP just after my son was born, so 13, 14 years ago. He's 13 and a half now. And so I started working in general practice. And when I started, I would rarely see young people. And if I did, it was often with a chest infection or a cough or a cold. And over the last, then I started to notice more and more young people coming in with mental health problems. About 10 years ago, started to see a really significant uptick in young people with anxiety, with depression, and just increasingly coming in to see me when I would rarely see 20-year-olds or teenagers. I would have never seen a teenager really, other than if they had an acute viral illness or were unwell, when I started as a GP. And then 8 years ago, I got a job at Bristol University working as a GP in the student health services. And that's when I really began to realize that young people were in crisis. I'd noticed this trend, but once I started working at student health, every day, all I saw really was young people who, 18, 19, 20-year-olds who were suffering with anxiety, depression, insomnia, eating disorders, self-harm. And actually in 2018, Bristol University sadly lost 10 students in 1 year to suicide. And this professionally and personally was just, life-changing for me. And I began to realize that this was something that we just couldn't ignore. Something was happening to our young people, something was happening to their well-being and mental health that hadn't been the case 10, 20 years ago, or when I had been at Bristol University. So I began getting really curious, asking lots of questions about background, about trauma. These were often affluent students, they had done well at in their A levels. They had often come from quite affluent backgrounds, but I couldn't pinpoint what had happened in their lives. I couldn't find those aces. I couldn't find trauma. But what I started to discover was that many of them had been given smartphones at a young age, had had excessive access to social media in their teenage years, or had developed a really unhealthy relationship with gaming devices. So began to ask young people about their experience of technology, began to ask them about their self-esteem, how they felt about themselves. And I just developed this kind of this feeling, that there was a relationship between poor mental health in later adolescence and exposure to smart technology, particularly social media, in younger adolescents. And I think now, that was 8 years ago, there wasn't much academic research then. It was more of a sort of just a feeling I got from the conversations I was having with young people. But now I'd say there's a huge amount more evidence about that relationship. And what was just a theory then, although we obviously haven't proved it, is becoming much more widely accepted now, sort of 8 years later.
Yeah, thank you. There's a couple of things that come to me out of that, which is firstly, just seeing that trend, that they're making the connections. But just to take a moment, that many young people, dying by suicide, it's like it tears a hole in the fabric of the universe when young people take their lives, and it's a mirror to society. The in a sort of a tribal mentality, a community, it's only as healthy as its sort of most unhappy or sickest people. And so if we have young people taking their lives, then we have got to have a look at ourselves. Jesus, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I think what I noticed in the students was a lack of hope, a sort of despair that actually life wasn't going to work out for them or wasn't going to get better, and that taking their life was an option. I'd never really seen that before, just this idea, this concept that actually there wasn't this hope that their future was going to be any better. So it was just easier to sort of give up now. And that really was so distressing. And I don't know if that's the impact of just social media eroding well-being and mental health, or sharing, maybe it's just exposure to excessive negative content. I've spent time talking to Ian Russell, whose daughter Molly sadly died by suicide, and the amount of suicide content that she was exposed to on social media is incredible. I think it was over 2,000 pieces of suicide content, and you think that changes your view on the world. You're constantly being fed this negative outlook, this lack of optimism, the idea that ending your life is a way out, is an option, is something that when I grew up, it wasn't even there as a sort of option. But for young people, I think they see it as a potential option if things don't get better, or if they don't feel that their life has got the purpose or the meaning that they want. So I think society has changed so dramatically, and it's catastrophic, because we need hope. Hope is what keeps you going. Hope is the light at the end of the tunnel, isn't it? And yet lose that hope if social media robs you of hope and feeds you a lie, then it's really impactful for a whole generation.
Thank you, Susie. Yeah, let's come back. I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, about the stuff that people are exposed to, what's actually out there. There's two things there. The first one, I mean, as someone who's, that thought has gone through my mind. When I had my breakdown, when I was at my lowest point, it wasn't that I thought it was a good option. I just felt that I had no option, so no hope. I just couldn't take the pain anymore. I just needed the pain to stop. And so, like a lot of people that come to Seen and Heard, I thought about taking my own life. And it was, really only having kids that kept me around. And actually, all through my life, I tracked it back, and I realized that my business model, my plan, was don't die till the kids are 18. I didn't have hope. I didn't have hope for my own life. I was purely to be of service to my children, to get them to the point at which they were independent. And then I was just going to go and drink myself to death somewhere. So I know that I remember the moment I first had hope. as well. It was about a year into my healing journey after my breakdown, and I felt something, and I could see just beyond a little bit. I could see, okay, maybe things can get better, but hope is just so powerful. It is everything. But what I did want to touch on was, in our community, so people who've been to particularly boarding schools, boarding and independent schools, suicide numbers are way, way, way ahead of the national average. And I don't know anybody who went to a boarding school who didn't know of at least a number of people who killed themselves while they were there, and then afterwards, and then throughout life.
Yeah.
I'm drawing a line here, and I'm not sure this is completely sort of self-serving of our audience, but when we speak to university counselling services, which we do, the university counselling services that have the most challenges are the ones that are fed by the elite schools. So when you mentioned that a lot of, Bristol is famously Bristol, Exeter, Newcastle, Oxbridge, etc. They're fed by the top schools, and we're told that behaviour on campus, drugs, drink, self-harm, issues around consent are actually worse in those universities fed by the elite schools. My belief, given that I went to university from an elite school and became a raging alcoholic nightmare, is that once released from the confines of, the boarding school, if you like, without a lot of emotional intelligence or empathy, and from a very dissociated background, you just run amok. Do you have a take on that?
Oh, it's hard, isn't it? Because I think there's many reasons I would say young people turn to drugs, alcohol, poor behavior, and lots of it will be their life experience. I haven't personally seen that link, but it's not something I've looked for with boarding school. For me, I've much more looked at their link with smart technology. And obviously, we know some boarding schools are really, really strict. Some obviously give their young people unlimited access to their devices, particularly because they say, their students need to be able to contact home, particularly if they've got international students. So I would say one of the issues I'm seeing in boarding schools is just how to monitor and control use of phones and smart devices. But I would be cautious because I haven't looked at the evidence of putting a link between education and some of those issues, although you can obviously imagine any sense of abandonment or rejection by your parents if you've been to boarding school very young, could have a huge impact on well-being and mental health.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a tough question without having that data there. I think it's really just the idea that when you said you would go back and ask the young people about their backgrounds, what we tend to see is that, and therapists don't do either. I went through 20 years of talk therapy and no one asked me where I went to school. No one asked me that I went away at 7 years old to a boarding school. So it's just not seen as an adverse childhood experience, but it's effectively just residential care or an institutional upbringing, the same as it would be in the care sector. It's just got a nicer playing field. So, there is that, I think, opening up trauma awareness in society that could be bullying, could be in a very happy, stable family, but there's bullying in your situation, or it could be, there's a lot that can happen for young people. So thank you for following me on with that. You opened up the question of that was one of the things one of our talking points, which is smartphone use in boarding schools. So we often hear it's all better now, the abandonment, neglect stuff, because kids can reach home more easily. Whereas we would have our letters read by the staff before they were allowed to be sent out. Before you were even given a stamp, you had to have your letter approved to make sure there was nothing dodgy in there, that could sort of bring the school into disrepute. And the phone, there was one pay phone and a long queue of people like there is in prison. You just queue up, use the pay phone. So now they're saying, well, because the smartphones are there, the kids have access to parents all the time. What's your take on substituting a smartphone for a parent?
I mean, it's obviously not a substitute, but I think when we think about the impact of boarding school on children, I think some of it comes down to choice. I think if a child feels that they're choosing this it's less negative than if you think you're being sent away or you've done something wrong or you're being rejected, because I think it's that sense of internal rejection that can be so negative on a child. Whilst if they feel empowered and that they're choosing something and they still feel connected with their parents, it's very, very different. So I think how a young person is involved in that decision can be really crucial to the outcome. And I think how involved parents are in that ongoing relationship is really important too. So I actually think obviously being able to talk to your parents much more regularly if you're away from home can be a really positive thing if it's just calling them or FaceTiming them. The problem is if that ability to call your parent is paired with unlimited access to social media or being able to game through the night or being able to access inappropriate content, that's where the problem lies. So I think, actually feeling like your parents are more present and more available whilst being away from home can be incredibly protective if we can parcel away and make sure they're then equally not exposed to excessive social media at the same time. So it's a really fine balance, which is why I think some schools are going just for brick phones. If you can call your parents on a brick phone with no access to the internet, that's much, much better than actually having unlimited access to them, but also putting up all night scrolling on social media.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for coming with me, because that's our audience. I appreciate you sort of coming down that path with me. So circling back then to, you were really seeing this, say, at Bristol University, you're really just noticing these trends changing, the suicides, the content, the self-esteem challenges, anxiety, depression, etc. And at this point, young children yourself. So can you tell us a little bit about how being a parent started to sort of open your eyes to this and direct you on your mission that you're on now?
I think as parents, we all want our children to thrive, don't we? We want them to be happy. And, that's our sort of end goal, isn't it? We want happy, thriving children. And I just think seeing 19, 20-year-olds who were so deeply unhappy made me really project on to my daughter. She was in year 6, so she's about 10 at the time. And I just thought, wow, in 8 to 10 years, what sort of young person do I want you to be? How do I want you to be feeling? Where do I want you to be in life? And I just thought, goodness, this is not the outcome I want for you. This is not, I do not want my own children to be in this position where they've made it to university, yet they're so deeply, deeply unhappy. So again, this is where I did my deep thinking. I was just, what is it about their students in their experience that has led to these problems? And as I said, the thing that I really saw time and time again was their exposure to social media, which I felt had inhibited their ability to develop their self-esteem in adolescence. So I thought for my children, well, actually, if I can delay their first smartphone, if I can delay their exposure to social media, I can give them, longer, really, give them longer as children, give them longer to be unaffected and compare themselves less with other people, and hopefully enable them to grow their sense of self, grow their self-esteem, and avoid some of the problems that I was seeing in the young people that I was caring for as their doctor. So yeah, it really made me think about my children's well-being. It really made me think about how we could parent them differently, from what we could do to try and protect their mental health, realizing that it was such a problem. I felt like I had this crystal ball, seeing what was happening to young people that other parents didn't have, that I thought I had this incredible kind of insight into a mental health crisis that wasn't yet sort of being recognized because it was happening so fast. We're only really now recognizing what's happening to young people. And I think if parents really knew the extent of the mental health crisis, we would all be doing far, far more to protect our children and do something about it.
Yeah, thank you. I really hear that. I'm really honoured that you saw ahead to what the work was doing and you made those decisions for your children. And what do you? It's difficult when you're a parent because having an objective view is really hard of your own kids and stuff like that. But I'll ask the question anyway, which is, objectively, what when you look at them and their peers who may have had smartphones for a long time, who may have social media, what have you given them as a gift?
I think I gave them longer being children,
Mm.
and I think I gave them longer without social comparison, longer with other interests and hobbies, free play. My eldest stood up in front of 400 people in May over the summer this year, and she said actually she felt she'd really benefited from not having a smartphone. She felt less affected. She does have a smartphone now, but she said she just felt she had a healthier relationship than her friends. She certainly has never had sleep issues. So she said lots of her friends scroll themselves to sleep on a smartphone, and she just said actually, because her phone has always been out of her bedroom, she just said she just didn't have that unhealthy relationship to help her get to sleep. She felt just less affected by smart devices, better able to study. And I think I can see all those things in her. Her generation of young people really are in crisis. It's very hard. And I would say as a parent, I don't think there's many adults in the UK who don't know a young person in mental health crisis now. And again, a decade ago, I don't think we would have done, but I think everyone now knows a niece, a nephew, a friend's child, a child, it's somebody who they know is really, really struggling. And I think that needs to wake all of us up to what is happening to our young people and what do we need to do as parents. I think we need to step up to see
Mm.
that there is a crisis going on. I think we need to step up and do something differently.
Do something differently. I really hear you there. If there's parents listening, which there will be lots of, or teachers and all that, will be watching, therapists who work in this area with young people, etc. What I heard from you, and I'd love you to sort of clarify and just expand a little bit, is delaying the phone. Delaying the smartphone as long as possible. Really, social media. Just know, or in a different relationship with it. And I heard you saying keeping the phone out the bedroom. Could you sort of just clarify and expand around those kind of key guidelines?
Yeah, so I think my top tip for parents whose children don't have a smartphone already would be to delay for as long as possible, ideally till at least 14. They can have a basic phone to call and to text on, but really avoiding a phone with internet access to a minimum of 14. And at 14, actually, I still wouldn't give them access to the internet
Mm.
on a smart device, but trying to delay that first smartphone for as long as possible and just allowing them to build their self-esteem in that period and keep up their other interests and hobbies without being distracted by a phone. Really delaying social media till a minimum of 16. As we've seen in Australia, they've just taken this really bold step to ban social media for under 16s. But I do think if we think about the access that social media gives young people to inappropriate content, to online comparison, to strangers, to advertising, to all sorts of things, I would say the minimum age of digital consent really is 16, where they can access these apps with understanding the risks and benefits. And that's what we believe at Papaya, is that young people have a right to understand the impact that smart technology has on their mental health. We're giving them these apps without sharing with them the negative impact it might have on their health and well-being. And I think they have to have consent. They need to understand the risks that these platforms can have on them
Mm.
before we give them to them. So delaying social media to 16. Um, on the other hand, if you do have a child with a smart device already, I wouldn't panic, but I would just say there's some things that you can do to keep it safer. So absolutely no smart technology in the bedroom. The cyberbullying, the inappropriate content, the doom scrolling, it's not happening around a kitchen table in the daytime. It's when our young people are on their own in their bedrooms. They're incredibly vulnerable at night when everyone else is in bed and they're on their own. And that's where the things they see online can be incredibly detrimental to them, and they're at their most vulnerable, and it also impacts their sleep. So just for the grounds of online safety and protection of sleep, to try and keep devices, or to keep devices out of the bedroom at night time. And then there are safeguards you can put in place, so putting time limits on the phone. So we know that the impact of social media on mental health is dose relationship. It's correlational to the time spent. So actually, if you can cut the time back, just the negative impact is reduced. It doesn't go away, but it is reduced. So adding time limits and adding filters and parental control software just to try and reduce the exposure to inappropriate content. But none of those things are going to be a fail-safe. If your child's got a smartphone, I think about taking the web browser off it and looking at every single app on that phone and thinking, does that app serve my child's best interests? Does it benefit their well-being and their mental health? And if it doesn't, having a really serious think like whether you want to keep that up on the device.
Really powerful guidance there. I think, yeah, and when you hear it, when I hear it from you, it makes total sense. To give children a childhood, to give them a safe space to develop their self-esteem and to build who they are. And these, for me, the digital consent you mentioned, I haven't heard that term a lot, but I'm hearing it more now. Really, what we've done is we've put an incredibly powerful and harmful drug out into the market, if you want to call it that, without any testing, and we've unleashed it on our most vulnerable population and kind of stood back and gone, oh, and just watched from the sidelines as the things melted down. So it really, when technology moves so quickly, or even it was like this with synthetic drugs and things like that, legal highs, they were springing up so fast. The powers that be, they couldn't keep up with it. So I think there is a real sort of hard look at ourselves as a society, and that, but without the guilt and the shame you mentioned as well. If you're giving your child a smartphone, you can't beat yourself up over it. It's just about, okay, it's happened. What can we do now? Like all things in life.
Exactly. But I think the thing we have to remember as well is the tech industry has got so much money behind it, which is why there is so much opposition to making any changes. There is so much money. Social media was unleashed, without proper safety testing. And actually, we're seeing exactly the same again with AI and AI chatbots, which are actually potentially even more harmful than the social media that we've already seen negatively impacting our children. But again, the money behind it means that the safeguards are not in place before they've just been put out to the world, because tech bosses want to make money and then not putting our children's safety first. So at the moment, for most parents across the world, apart from if you live in Australia, or Denmark, you need to be actually at the forefront of your child's safety, and taking those really proactive measures to keep your children safe, because actually the guardrails are not in place at the moment for your child, and it's very difficult to put them in place because of the vast quantity of money behind the tech industry.
Yeah, thank you, Susie. And mentioning the tech industry, and you mentioned it much earlier on around like the gamification of everything, like the dopamine slot machine. As there's a wonderful podcast after that name that I thought was very good, produced by a guy who worked in the industry, I believe. When I saw in primary school what my girls were being given for like times table rock stars, and one of my close family friends, she's about 10 years old. She's been learning a language. How wonderful, you think. But because it's on Duolingo and it's on a smart technology, she now gets anxious if she ends her streak of going on every day. And she was jittery. She came to stay with me for a day, and my kids haven't got any devices or anything like that. She came with her own device and said, I know I can't use it here because we don't have devices in the house, but I must keep my streak. She's learning Irish, Gaelic. So, can you speak to that sort of gamification, which seems quite innocent and sort of incentivizing good behaviors, but to me, it feels really dodgy.
The problem is that they are using those same dopamine reward pathways that we see on social media and gaming to motivate you to learn. So the end result might be positive, but the journey, the way you get there, involves dopamine reward pathways and little treats and streaks on the game. And the problem with that is that young people then learn because of the streak and the dopamine rather than that internal motivation. So I always say learn a language because you want to learn a language. Do Duolingo because actually today you want to learn your language. Do not go on Duolingo to keep up your streak, because actually we need to be internally motivated. We need to be motivated by that progression, that desire to do something, because those are the skills that you need to succeed in your learning later on in life. If our young people are only learning because they get a dopamine hit, how are they going to sit down and write a history essay at A level where you have to put hundreds of hours of research and learning in, but there's no dopamine there? So I think, and the concentration, again, I worry about the impact of learning online that has on our concentration and our ability to enjoy long form content. So I think although the immediate effects might be that they learn their times tables quicker or they appear to be learning a language, I think the long-term impact on learning is the loss of internal motivation and the loss of concentration and a lot of the very cognitive skills that we need to succeed in life. So I think I have deep concerns about the impact of EdTech on young people's well-being and ability to learn. I think, again, it's been introduced incredibly quickly, rolled out during COVID, and suddenly, so many children have got an iPad in school and they're learning on a screen. And again, we're not going to see the impact for maybe a decade. And by then, a whole generation of young people will have lost out on these key learning skills. So I would always say to parents, can they learn? Are there ways to learn the times tables that aren't on an iPad? Print out times table grids, do the old fashioned methods because the evidence is young people learn better, but you want them to be internally motivated, that their reward is learning their times tables, not getting to play on the game at the end of the times table walk star.
Brilliant, great advice there. Looking back on some of my parenting and some of those apps and things during COVID when we were homeschooling kids and stuff, it was all about getting staying top of the leaderboard, getting the next reward. I just got a reward for a new coat for my avatar, and it's like, as opposed to the old-fashioned way, learn the times table so you can go out and play.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm not sure I even agree with that, to be quite honest. I don't know if times tables are a bit old-fashioned, but that's me, I suppose. But you mentioned Australia, Denmark. What would be your call? I know you and Smartphone Free Childhood and others are doing an awful lot to lobbying media, lobbying government, trying to get a change. What's the change you want to see for us here in the UK right now?
I think, banning social media for under 16s is an incredibly powerful bit of legislation because it really takes the power away from a smartphone. It's not actually the smartphone that's the problem. It's the vehicle that houses the social media and the app store and all the things that are on it. So if you take away social media and ideally the web browser as well, but you really free up children to have a piece of kit that's not addictive anymore. I think you empower parents to feel like their children shouldn't have social media. So although there are get-arounds, they can download other apps, they can still probably get around age verification. I think as a parent, it's very different, isn't it? If something is illegal, you're much less likely to enable it and equip your child to have it because actually it is breaking the law. It means that young people are freed up to enjoy time together. I don't think it's coincidence Australia's done this in their summer. I hope that Australian teenagers are enjoying some, beautiful time outside and fresh air and sunshine and time together in ways that are just much harder to do when everyone else is on a phone. So I think by taking it away from everyone, you just take away this whole herd mentality collective problem that we've got in the UK, that actually, it is now hard for young people to enjoy time together because a lot of the group will be head down on their phone. And it's just so sad, isn't it, that young people aren't, even when they do meet up in person, that time together is inhibited by time on devices. My 17-year-old's on Dartmoor at the moment with a few friends. And actually what's great is there is no reception. So they are, they will be enjoying, fires and reading books and chatting, and they've taken loads of board games with them because there is no Wi-Fi, there is no internet.
Mm.
And actually it's just a really liberating place to be. And I think even as an adult, it's very liberating to have time when we can't access tech because it's addictive, it takes our time and our attention. It's actually all of us, I think, craving for that time to disconnect, that time just to be. But it's so hard to achieve it because we all have FOMO. We're worried we're missing out. We feel like we should be checking our work emails. We should be responding. There's always something we could be or should be doing. But actually, it's very freeing. It's very good for our mental health. We talked about the stress response system at the beginning. I think part of the reason so many adults are struggling with their mental health is because we are on the go 24/7. We are all struggling to down regulate our cortisol because we're working so hard and we're so distracted by our devices. So for
Mm.
all of us to have tech-free time and allow our stress response just to down regulate is so important.
Thank you. Those are so important. We talked about this, that regulatory system, just bringing that in. Ultimately, I try and, my coaching stuff, I keep it really simple, which is that ultimately we are designed to be in nature, roaming about the place, or we're designed to be around a campfire or in a cave. That our wiring hasn't changed a lot in 200,000 years. We're still running on that, but we've been given all of this stuff, and it's overwhelming. Our health is directly relational, I believe, to our connection with the earth, with outside, with nature, and with ourselves and each other. That relational, connection in that environment, and any technology just takes us away. So I see people out on a lovely dog walk, the dog's enjoying it, looking around. I think there's a cartoon that shows this. The person's on the phone. Or someone's out for a run. You think, oh great, getting some fitness. They spent the whole time looking at like their ranking on Strava or something. I'm like, you're not connected. You're connected to this. You're not connected to this. And I believe that is our biggest public health. I'm in the smartphone-free childhood because of it, but actually because I believe it's symptomatic of a disconnection to each other and the earth. Do you have a flavour on that, especially as a GP?
Well, I do. As I talked about earlier, it's that ability to connect with other people in that real person, deep relationship where we are vulnerable with each other and where we can show our real selves, is just so important to our well-being, to our sense of life satisfaction, to our ability to feel loved and to feel like we belong. And I think we are losing that as we externalize relationships to social media, where we connect on a superficial level that is all based about how we look and how successful we are on social media profiles. Hence why, filters, showing our highlight reel, social media becomes this just platform where young people create this perfect self that isn't necessarily even who they are, and yet then really struggle to have those real relationships. That is what they really, really need. There was a story in the news of a young girl who got so addicted to posting on Snapchat that she didn't go outside for 2 years because she was so scared of her friends seeing the real her, because she'd only showed this filtered version of herself on Snapchat. And I think, to a much more minor degree, young people are struggling that they've shown this perfect self on social media, making thousands of connections online, but just really struggling to realize that actually it's their real, vulnerable, imperfect self that's actually the most lovable and likable. And that's who we all are looking for in people. We're not looking for someone who's perfect. We're looking for someone we can connect with because they connect with us. And actually that's a lot of my work in senior school that I do, and a lot in my book I really talk about how to make those real relationships with people is about being prepared to show your real self. And I think we're scared of that now. We all want to be likable and successful, and actually but that's not the side of us that really connects with other humans. And we're losing that, and yet it's the foundation of humanity, is
Mm.
those real deep relationships that we desperately need. And again, I touched on AI chatbots, but there's a real issue now that young people are turning to chatbots for relationship, because a chatbot will always validate you, will always listen to your opinion and agree with you, because they're internally programmed at their core for engagement with whatever you feed them. And unfortunately, that is the opposite of real friendship. In real friendship, we have to compromise. We have to listen. Yet a chatbot teaches you that you're the center of the universe and that everything revolves around you. And these are not key skills that young people need. They need to learn friendship. They need to learn two-way communication. They need to learn empathy and listening and connection. And the chatbot just teaches them the exact opposite. And I'm deeply concerned for how our young people are going to connect with each other, because a chatbot on a superficial level is much more appealing, because it will never challenge you and it will always agree with you.
Wow. Okay, thank you, Susie. That's super powerful. That's challenged something that I had in my head, which was actually I was liking some of what I was seeing from AI as far as its ability to empathize with what you were experiencing in that moment, which is a skill I feel we've lost a lot in society. However, I can understand it's saccharine sweet. It will never give that pushback, that holding. It will never set a barrier to hold. It will always just allow you to keep flowing. Yeah.
And we've got to remember, it's not real empathy. It is an algorithm trained to emanate empathy. Real empathy comes from a fellow human who's heard your story, who is connected with it, and then can express a response back. Chatbot empathy is just a program that's there to make you feel better. And the reason it shows empathy is not for your well-being or for your good, it's because you'll engage with that superficial empathy that it emanates. So actually, we need to be really, really careful about how we use chatbots to connect or feel better. I think if we're needing a fellow human to understand, I would phone a friend, or if you're feeling, really dreadful, and having, awful thoughts, phone the Samaritan, speak to a human person who can hear your story. If we rely on AI to empathize with us, it might superficially make us feel better, but what you're looking for is not empathy. I would say it's connection. What we're looking for is someone to understand us, understand our story, and react back. And a chatbot can do it on a superficial level, but it cannot give us that human connection that we really, really need, and that we're all looking for. And I think it's getting harder to find. It is getting much, much harder to find that real world loving connection with our fellow humanity, because we're spending our lives on digital platforms.
Yeah. Thank you, Susie. That's really challenged something for me, and I appreciate that challenge. So one thing that was amazing was to get some time with you today, and that time is starting to run short. Part of the reason for that is because you're so busy with speaking engagements for Papaya. So can you just tell us, what's keeping you so busy in those engagements? Who are you talking to, and what's the reception been?
Yes, I mean, Papaya has had a really kind of fantastic couple of years where we've gone from it really just being me speaking to students and parents to and I have a team of 40 speakers who go into schools and talk to parents about the impact of smartphones on mental health. So I go into schools myself, both running Key Stage 2 workshops and particularly the senior school, the Key Stage 3 workshops, helping young people understand the impact that technology has on their mental health. And I just love doing that. And I do that through asking powerful questions, because I think young people do actually understand and know this stuff. They can see the impact that smartphones are having on their friends. And yet, by asking them questions, I'm facilitating their deep thinking and they're facilitating change. Because actually, if I just tell them what to do, it's like if they're not going to listen. But if they've come up with the answer themselves, they're much, much more likely to take those proactive steps to protect their mental health and reduce their screen time. So we run workshops in schools. So I spend about a day a week in schools talking to young people, and I just love hearing their stories. I was at a school in London last week where I met a 13-year-old boy who actually had said he'd been completely addicted to his smartphone, to gaming, to watching YouTube shorts. And about a year ago, completely on his own back. He had cut back his screen time to less than an hour a day. He'd started going to the gym, and he literally said he had transformed his well-being and his mental health by cutting back his screen time. Now, I was just so impressed to meet a young person who had had that self-realization and self-revelation about the impact it was having on him. But he stood up in front of his whole class, to tell his story, and it was just great to hear a young person who had made those changes. We also talk to parents, because I think as parents, we have a massive role in this too. Our children are living in our homes. We are paying the Wi-Fi bills. We are buying these smartphones for them. And I think we can be passive and say it's not our problem, but actually, if we want our children to thrive in the digital age, I think we have to be incredibly proactive as parents as to the exposure we give our young people to the internet and to how much we allow it into their lives. So I think as parents, we are powerful, particularly when we stand together. That's where the smartphone free movement, I think, is so incredible, to find like-minded parents, to not just be afraid of our young people being left out, but actually to say the long-term goal is more important than the short-term win of superficial connection. That the long-term aim of growing a grown-up, growing a young person who understands the world, who's had a childhood, who's grown those, communication skills, is more important than the ease of tracking them, or the ease of buying a bus ticket, or the ease of them being able to feel like they're got the same as their friends because they've got access to every single social media app. The long-term goal is the most important thing.
Long-term goal. Thank you. And that very last point you made was something, is there's three big pushbacks I always hear. The bus thing is massive as a pushback, or the bus passes on there. So bus companies, if you're listening, sort it out because that's ridiculous. But the biggest one is going right back full circle, just as we're sort of coming to an end, bullying. I hear a lot, if I don't give my child a smartphone, they will be left out from their mates. If they don't have their apps, if they don't have the social media, they will be excluded and they will be bullied, which we know what bullying does. So what's your call on that?
Yeah, well, so the irony is it's the smartphone is the mechanism by which they're bullied. So I'd say children without smartphones are actually really protected from bullying. Bullying in person is less damaging to young person's self-esteem than bullying online.
Wow.
24% of children who are bullied online self-harm as a result, because of some of the reasons I talked about earlier, the humiliation, the impact on their self-esteem. So actually, you think, you're helping them by giving a smart device. It is actually the mechanism by which they are more likely to be bullied on, and then it is more likely to have a negative impact on them. So actually, I think we need to teach our children that it's okay to be different, that we don't have to have something just because everyone else does, and that actually the long-term aim of happiness and well-being, resilience, are more important than the short-term goals of just fitting in. And actually, those are just such vital life skills, aren't they? But that is what we want to be teaching our young people. They don't need to be like everyone else. They need to be their own person. But actually, my son who's 13, some of his friends without smartphones are his best friends because they're still fun. They come up with creative ideas. They can play a game, they can still build Lego or have a Nerf war. While some of his friends who are much heavier tech users are harder for him to engage with because they've lost some of those other interests and hobbies. So if we want to be the fun person in the room, if we want to engage people, if we want to have interesting and dynamic conversation, then actually, being present and giving our attention by not being distracted by a smart device is a real gift that we can give to the world.
That's really beautiful. I can feel a lot of emotion coming out there because it's, I know what you're saying to be absolutely true. So a great answer there, because there will be lots of parents out there listening who, we all as parents need a little bit of permission sometimes, a bit of a nudge to do the right thing. If you listen to your parenting instincts, we'd all be perfect all the time. But usually what creeps in is societal stuff, familial stuff, our own trauma, what's going on in the news, blah, blah, blah. And instead of listening to our intuition, we go against it and we fall out of integrity. And that can actually make us sick as well, physically and emotionally. So I really hear you. And because I'm so passionate about this, we could go all day, but I know we've gone over time already. I'm very sorry. But so for anyone listening out there, and Papaya, plus Susie, plus 40 others are out there delivering talks all over the country, and it's only growing all the time. There's online stuff, there's physical, in person at schools, parenting groups, etc. And there are links to Papaya, to Smartphone Free Childhood, and to Susie's amazing book, The Healthy Selfie, will be in the notes for today's podcast. Is there any final thoughts? Anything you'd like that we haven't explored? Anything you'd like to leave people with, or perhaps anything about the book, or anything else that's going on?
I would just leave with hope. We talked actually at the beginning about the loss of hope being the root of despair and really, really difficult times. And I would just say, let's all have hope. Let's have hope for our children. Let's have hope for ourselves. Let's have hope for society, that actually, if we put down our devices, look at each other in the eye and connect, we will be happier and healthier. So maybe now think about how you can either go and spend some time outside, talk to a stranger on your dog walk, or phone a friend and arrange to meet them up for a coffee. But let's think about actually how can we connect and reach out to our fellow humans, because that will make us happier and healthier, both ourselves and also be a gift to them. So I think I just want to leave with a message of hope to put down your device and go and do something positive today.
Beautiful. Well, we'll do that, because I'm sure all of us have been watching this on a device, and the irony
I was thinking that
not lost. So now's a great chance to put it down. You've made it to the end of the podcast. Congrats, and go enjoy life, real life out there. But today it's been beautiful, connective conversation. Your work's wonderful, Susie, and what you're doing at Papaya is meaningful, timely, and powerful. So I want to say a huge thank you for taking your time and honouring your work and the work of your colleagues. And a huge thanks to everyone listening. It's been the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I'm Chris Braich. We've been with Dr. Susie Davies from Papaya. And I really look forward to seeing you on the next one. So we'll say goodbye to Susie. See you later.
Bye, everyone.
Say
Bye.
goodbye
Thank
to everyone
you.
listening. So see you next time. Thanks. Bye.